The goal of this video is to share with you my initial coding decisions for making this app. I want to share with you the wireframes that I built, some of the decisions I made for the technology stack that I built, and also share with you some challenges that I faced initially with constructing my first SaaS project. I knew I wanted to build a mean stack app for a couple of reasons. First, I was really interested in the technology stack itself. I know that it's very popular, it's been growing in popularity, and there's a few frameworks within it that I'd love to learn. And I know the popularity in the job market, and this project is going to serve a couple purposes. One, obviously because I want to build a tool that I can use, but also because it's going to be a great project for potential hiring managers down the road. I decided to use the mean technology stack, Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. I wanted to learn something that I wasn't quite learning in Hack Reactor, so we touched on a few frameworks, but we weren't doing the newer Angular, which seems to be very prevalent in the job market right now. And I kind of wanted to do something on my own. I wanted to push myself and further my learning. I wanted to share with you the wireframes of my project. Figured this would give you a good look into what a technology project looks like. And I think this is fascinating, and I hope you do too. If you want to build a mean stack app, this is probably what yours will look like. And if you're just interested in what it looks like, I hope this is pretty interesting to you. So here you are, the end user, sitting at your computer. You are accessing my application via the client. So this is your browser. This is when you go to www.google.com. You're accessing Google through the client. And here's the Angular 2 and TypeScript. So Angular 2 is the framework with which I can interact with the client. This is what's going to help render the data and kind of tie everything together that you see. TypeScript is the language that is used to write Angular code. Bootstrap, HTML, CSS, this is all the styling. There are also plenty of icons I'll use, like Font Awesome, I think is the one I'm predominantly using right now. So when you access the client and you start interacting with the client, so think about if you're on an application, you go to your user profile page. You're going to make an HTTP request over here to the server, and I have Expressjs as my middleware, Node.js as my server. Here's the cool little picture of a server. And what the server code will be doing is listening to requests. It will be sending out responses, and it'll be handling the routing. So whenever I go to, say, profile, it's going to go to a different route than properties, for instance. And the server will help route all of the requests. So in the example of using a profile, when you request the profile page, you're obviously going to want to render data, the user profile data. So what the server will do is then connect to a database. And my database up here is a Mongo database. And I'm using Mongoose as, I believe it's the ORM, I think that's what you call it. But it's essentially a little framework that helps interact with the Mongo database and makes it a lot easier to write the code. So here's the server making a request. So let's say you need to get user data for your user profile page. You're going to make a request from the server to the database, and the Mongoose framework will be listening for the routes. And whenever it gets a route to, say, get the data for the user profile, it'll make a database call to the database using, syntax. And here's the database. It was going to return the data. It's going to find the data that you have requested. It will return the data down here to the server. And in the response, right here, it's going to send the response back to the client. And Angular 2 and all the good old TypeScript code, that will handle the response and then render the data. So that's a very simple way of seeing how this application will be implemented, essentially. And you, the end user, you're sitting over here at your computer, you're just interacting with the web, and you're complaining about something taking 1.5 seconds to load. Well, when you actually see all that goes on in the app, and the requests, the response, the interaction with the database, the response from the database, the rendering of the page, the front end framework, taking all the data and rendering it properly, there's a lot going on. And you may have noticed up here I have some Firebase. Firebase is pretty flippin' awesome. It is a cloud storage bought out by Google a few years ago. And in my application, I'm going to have the ability to add photos. So using the user profile example from before, think about a user who's going to want to upload a photo, a profile image. Well, I didn't want to save the images on the database. That's going to be a lot of data. So I figured it would actually be best to store it in the cloud. I thought that would be best, and in my limited knowledge, it seems to be best from what I've Googled and everything. So what I'm doing is, in my application, when a user wants to upload an image, what I'm going to do is make a call to Firebase. Firebase has a few different things that they offer, such as hosting, a database, and storage. Well, I'm going to use the storage. So store photos, the storage call makes a call to the database to store the photo, and that's that. Well, at some point I'm going to want to get that image, so I'll also need to be making a request to the Firebase storage, and I basically make a request to get the photo URL, makes a request to get the URL, returns with the URL, returns with the URL with the client, and the client will be able to render that image. So what I'm going to be doing is essentially storing the photo, then making a second call to get the photo URL that's stored in Firebase. And when I have that URL, then I'll make a request to the database, which I'll be making a post request to the server. The server will listen to the post request, route to a specified route, let's say a post to user profile, and then it'll store the data in the database. So it's going to store the URL in the database, and the URL will be handled by Firebase. Hope that all made sense. I hope this is clearer. And at the end, I'm going to deploy to either Heroku or Firebase. I'm not sure yet. I'm not there yet, and I'm really just not sure. I don't know what's best. I have a little familiarity with Heroku, and Firebase seems pretty dope. So I'm going to choose either one, and when I get to that point, I'll hopefully make the right decision. But this is essentially my application, and I hope you got a lot out of this. Unfortunately, when you are learning a new technology stack, you're going to be confronted with a lot of challenges, and I faced quite a few thus far, and I'll share with you some of them that I've faced, and hopefully they can help you. So initially, I bought a Udemy course for building an ASP.NET Core project using Angular on the front end, and this is two different technology stacks that I had no idea how they worked. I was very unfamiliar with them, and I figured the tutorial that I would follow would present a great working example and something I could follow enough to be able to build and then kind of learn as I go. And unfortunately, maybe, I don't know, a couple weeks into it, I realized I just didn't know enough. I was not knowledgeable enough of programming, and in addition of either technology stack to help build it, and I felt completely lost, and whenever I hit an error, it was completely destroying. It was a complete block. I had no way of advancing. So after spending a few weeks building something using one whole technology stack, I had to completely destroy the project and start anew. And that's why I went with the mean stack, which I am more familiar with, and felt like I was better able to handle the errors if I was confronted with them. I don't have any experience with TypeScript. Luckily, I am very familiar with JavaScript, which translates well. However, this is a new language to learn, and since I didn't know it, there's going to be a learning curve, and unfortunately there was. I don't know Angular 2, TypeScript, Angular 2, and also just building a full stack application from scratch. I've done a bootcamp before, and I've built it kind of with the guidance of others, but doing it on my own is a completely different animal. And because this is a project that I want to put out in production and put out to the world, there are a lot of things that I need to consider that I've never been confronted with. And one of those is just start to finish, I need to make sure everything's really good and programmed really well, because I have ambitions of this scaling, and the deploying process, everything is going to be, there are going to be a lot of parts that are new, and this is going to be a challenge from day one. One of the most important challenges that I'll be faced with is every technical decision is on me. Unfortunately, when you're learning a new technology stack, you are going to be confronted with a lot of debugging issues, and debugging is certainly a skill, and as you become more advanced with a certain language and framework, your debugging time decreases exponentially. The unfortunate thing is, in order to learn and get better, you're going to have those moments early on when debugging seems like a complete nightmare. And unfortunately, I've had a few days where I spent 2 or 3 hours just debugging what I felt like just to get back to the start. Something would throw an error, I had no idea what it was or what it meant. I would go online and have to read through tutorials, read through demos, and read through the technical documentation just to get an idea of what it was. And like I said, 3 hours, sometimes that can be your whole day if that's all the time you have working on it, which is an annoying challenge. And to add, sometimes you feel like you're in over your head when you're debugging because you might not know how to handle it. After a certain amount of time, you may be confronted with the difficult emotion of, am I going to be able to figure this out? If you cannot solve the problem, there is no moving forward. And sometimes that can weigh on you if you've been working on a certain problem for 90 minutes. I'll share with you some of the resources I've used. 2 different Udemy courses. The first one is the ASP.NET Core and Angular. The Angular and Node.js, the mean stack guide, that is an awesome course. That's the one I used for a lot of my initial coding of this application before I really got up to speed. I also have a background in building out applications. I did General Assembly Bootcamp back in 2015. I'm doing Hack Reactor right now, and I've worked in a software development team for the past 2.5 years. So I have plenty of background. Obviously, Stack Overflow. One of the new skills I've been able to pick up on is reading technical docs. It's really challenging when you're a beginner. It looks like a foreign language, but as you become more equipped with reading them, becoming comfortable with the language or the framework, then it becomes a lot easier. And of course, because it's the technical docs, they typically have the solution. YouTube tutorials can be a great resource as well. I'm a very visual learner, so seeing someone implement a certain problem that I have is sometimes a lot more valuable than just reading about it on Stack Overflow or in the documentation. And lastly, I use Trello. I love Trello for project management.